Miro here, and today we're really thrilled to have Congressman Mike Levin from California's 49th District. And for those of you that don't know, that's the northern cusp of San Diego and the very southern part of Orange County. So lots of nice sunshine and beaches and beautiful nature. And Congressman, I know that you're in your district, so thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you, Miro and Monica. It's great to be with you.
And Congressman, I wanted to ask, 2 cycles ago, your district was a red to blue. There was a lot of talk about how climate issues might play in these types of purplish districts, we'll call them. And so I wanted to ask, since being in Congress, how have your constituents responded to your calls for action on the environment and action on climate change and investment in renewables? Because you've certainly been vocal about them in Congress.
Well, I think my district overwhelmingly supports bold action on climate change. And I ran as a clean energy advocate. That was my title on the ballot. And I brought about 15 years of experience in climate and energy policy and environmental law and business to the campaign. And we spoke a lot on the trail about the need to take bold and aggressive steps to combat the climate crisis, actually commensurate with the science. And that's what I've tried to do while serving as well. So I think every district is different. I've learned that what works in California on the coast, where you actually see and experience the impact of climate change every day, and representing an area like that is different than if you're representing a different part of the country with a diverse set of constituencies. And I've tried my best to meet my colleagues where they are, try to talk about the economic benefits of taking climate action, and just try to remind my colleagues that the economic consequences of doing nothing, of inaction, are far worse than whatever cost there is to taking action. And I'm very optimistic. I'm very hopeful as we have the new administration and a Senate that has Chuck Schumer as the majority leader rather than Mitch McConnell, as we've maintained our House Democratic majority, that we're going to be able to do bold and proactive things that we can look back on decades from now and know that we made a significant impact on dealing with this existential threat of climate change.
So, Congressman, that's a great segue to a little question about your district in particular, which includes Camp Pendleton, a huge Marine Corps base. And as you probably saw, President Biden said yesterday he wants to use the power of the federal government's purse strings to push electric vehicles out into the marketplace. So I'm wondering how you see that effort at a place like Camp Pendleton, where, you've got a ton of potential for using electric vehicles, for putting, all of this clean energy technology into overdrive and delivering it to the American public and buying American in the process.
When you actually speak to the leadership in the military, and I am very honored to get to represent the Marines and sailors at Camp Pendleton, they will tell you that climate security is actually national security. They will look at climate change as a national security threat. And so our ability to wean ourselves off of foreign oil and fossil fuels and to accelerate the transition to a more sustainable future where we have renewable energy generation, where we have more energy efficient buildings, where we've got more sustainable means of agriculture and of moving goods, moving people, all of that is consistent with national security. When you look actually at Camp Pendleton specifically, they've been doing a lot with renewable energy, with energy efficiency, well in advance of anybody from one administration or another telling them to. They've been doing it because it made economic sense and because it made sense from a base security perspective, the resiliency of the power grid, the ability to be independent. So I think it's a great example. Under President Obama, the Department of Defense was well on the way to procuring 2 gigawatts. They had what's called a MADOC, multiple award task order contract across the DoD. They were well on their way. And unfortunately, under the Trump administration, took a step back. But make no mistake, they're doing it from a national security perspective and an economic perspective. That's what will drive their decisions. I think that's what will drive General Austin's, now Secretary Austin's, decisions as well. And I'm eager to work with him and eager to work with those at DoD who are looking to, again, to accelerate sustainability.
That's great. I think they're going to be ready to meet you there, and we'll be looking for congressional help in getting that into the National Defense Authorization Act and sending that signal from Congress.
Well, we're definitely going to work with the Biden administration, every department, every agency. I'm so thrilled at some of the cabinet picks. I think they are competent, experienced, professional. And just as one example, my dear friend Deb Haaland, we sat sat next to each other in the House Natural Resources Committee for the last 2 years, pressing Secretary David Bernhardt at Interior to try to be more transparent and accountable and to explain his rationale for opening up our public lands for oil and gas and other purposes for a handful of special interests. Bernhardt, like so many in the Trump administration, was extremely hard to work with. So I find it wonderful that now the person who was sitting right next to me in all of those hearings, asking those tough questions of the prior administration, she will now be leading the department. And I cannot tell you how excited I am. And Deb will be making history as the first Native American cabinet member. She'll be just an outstanding member of the cabinet. And the same goes for people like Jennifer Granholm at DOE. Tony Blinken is going to be great at state. John Kerry is our special climate envoy. And the list goes on and on. These are climate champions. Pete Buttigieg, obviously, who will have to call Secretary Pete, not Mayor Pete. And I think EPA Administrator Regan and everybody in these agencies, I think, has that objective that this is an existential threat that we need to deal with. And if we do it in a intelligent way, that it will yield huge positive economic return. And at a time where our nation has millions and millions of people who are out of a job because of the pandemic, where the president and the vice president campaigned on a promise of building back better, I am excited for later this year to see a major infrastructure bill, whether it's done with budget reconciliation or whatever means we need to do it, where we get it past the House and Senate, and it improves not only our infrastructure, but provides us with the opportunity to deal in a tangible way with climate change. And the House already passed a precursor to it, H.R. 2, the Moving Forward Act, last year, with a lot of bold green measures. So it's an exciting time to serve in Congress. We're going to get it done. And my hope is we'll be able, as I said, to look back 20, 30, 50 years from now and know that we did a whole lot in this period to make positive progress and to prevent the worst from happening for future generations.
Speaking of a bold green future and literally building it out, what are your thoughts on offshore wind in California? And is there potential for the industry to get a foothold in places like San Diego, which are coastal communities?
Potentially there is. The challenge in California is that our continental shelf drops off very quickly. And so you have waters that are much deeper than on the East Coast. But I just spoke with one of our top state officials the other day, and there is an opportunity here. The belief of the Public Utilities Commission in California is that we could have up to 7 gigawatts of offshore wind in California. And so I'd like to work with our local stakeholders, our state stakeholders and elected officials, and let's see what we can do. And whatever federal support we can advance, we will be here to do it.
Yeah, that's great. California, I think, really wants to be on that leading edge, but needs a little bit of help getting there. Let's turn to the Paris Accord, and wanted to ask you about a bill that you co-sponsored in 2019 that would have prevented the Trump administration from using federal dollars to withdraw from the agreement. Now we're beginning to hear the Republicans in Congress talking about the Paris Agreement as something very, very political, kind of trying to over-politicize it like they did the Green New Deal. How do you think we can prevent that? How can we try to keep the Paris Accord sort of in the middle of the political spectrum? Is that possible?
We know that the only way we are going to make the type of greenhouse gas reductions necessary to overcome the worst impacts of climate change is if we get international cooperation and we get China and India and other countries who are major polluters to work with the United States in a collaborative fashion. And that's what the Paris Climate Agreement set out to do. And it was such a huge accomplishment to get virtually all the nations of the world to agree on some basic objectives and to set some metrics. Now we have to follow through. And the problem was, of course, that 2015, we enter into the Paris Agreement. We elect a president with a radically different view, denying climate science, denying science really at all. He just thought anything that President Obama did was wrong. And so he immediately reversed the action taken to enter into the Paris Accord. I had the opportunity to go with Speaker Pelosi and a group of about a dozen other House members and senators to Madrid just before the pandemic hit, right at the end of 2019, to go to the COP25 conference, the UN conference on climate. That's where the Paris Agreement in 2015 was signed, same with many other agreements over the years. It was really really sad to be there with the Trump administration, whose objective was to try to promote LNG exports to the developing world. That's why they were there, not to promote sustainability or to advance renewable energy, but to promote the export of fossil fuels to the developing world. And I get to go back, at least I hope I get to go back, assuming the conference is back on and the pandemic is, the worst of the pandemic is behind us. This year we'll be in Glasgow, Scotland, towards the end of the year for COP26. And it'll be so incredible to get to go back with the Biden-Harris administration and people who are committed to working collaboratively again. And I think our message loud and clear will be America is back and we need the help of the international community. Let's work together. Let's accelerate the deployment of clean energy technologies. And America is positioned to lead. I think we have to do all we can to continue to show leadership with electric vehicles, as an example. We need to make sure that when you buy an electric car in 5 or 10 or 20 years, that you're buying an American-made electric car. And there's going to be fierce global competition, both for the vehicles themselves and for the underlying battery technology. We need to make every effort to try to put our companies in the lead, because that is going to be a global, potentially multi-trillion-dollar market for battery technology, not only for vehicles, but for storage. As we put more renewables, intermittent renewables on the grid, we're going to need ways to store that electricity, and innovating in batteries will be key. So I bring all of that up because it's very much on my mind. 88% of the global greenhouse gas emissions are happening in places not in the United States. And so John Kerry and his role, working with Gina McCarthy as our domestic climate czar, I just think they're two fantastic representatives of our country and of our values. And I'm excited to see where the next couple of years will take us.
And I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about solutions to climate change that are based in nature, because we can't hope to solve the climate crisis without protecting nature. And President Biden has vowed to protect 30% of America's land and water by 2030, the 30 by 30 plan. And I wanted to ask, what are the opportunities in California to create more protected land and water? And is the Antiquities Act the best way to do this, do you think?
Well, I think that it has historically worked very well. And, notwithstanding President Trump wanting to unwind some of the protected areas during his administration, I'm on the House Natural Resources Committee, as I mentioned, and we're going to work with Secretary Haaland and the Department of Interior, the National Park Service, and everyone else in the new administration to ensure that we're doing all we can to protect and preserve federal lands, however we're able to do. Also with the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the Great American Outdoors Act, which passed and was signed into law by President Trump. Again,
yeah, who would have thought?
Hard to believe, but it happened. The short story on that is that you had Steve Daines in Montana and you had Cory Gardner in Colorado, and they desperately needed something to bring back home. It worked for Daines, it didn't work for Gardner. Obviously, Hickenlooper won. But when you had those two senators and those two tough races say, hey, we need to protect our national parks, we need permanent funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, that gave just enough impetus where McConnell allowed the vote on the floor of the Senate, and it got, I think, around 74 or 75 votes in the Senate. Of course, we'd already passed complementary legislation in the House to fully fund LWCF. And so it's an example of how good things can happen. Now, when we actually have majorities in the House and the Senate and Democratic White House, I hope that we'll go further. I'm extremely pleased to see President Biden discussing moratoriums on certain oil and gas development on federal lands. We've also led in the House on the Natural Resources Committee with legislation to, in fact, it was also signed into law as part of the end of year omnibus bill that had the spending package, but also the COVID relief. As part of that major bill, we included a goal of 25 gigawatts of new renewable energy on public lands by 2025. Secretary Haaland will be able to work with us on that as well. So sort of that dual goal of preserving and protecting our public lands however we can, but also trying to leverage renewable energy investments and development in an environmentally responsible manner. That's what I'm all about, whether it be locally, statewide, federally, and I think that that's what you'll see in the new Biden administration.
The new administration will get to spend some of that parks money that you all passed, and hopefully they will ban offshore oil and gas drilling, which I know matters immensely to California and Californians and to lots of other people who live along the coast in other parts of the country.
I think Rick Scott, now Senator Rick Scott, when he was Governor Rick Scott, he was asking the Trump administration not to drill off the Florida coast.
Right?
Exactly. Same with our friends in South Carolina, same with all the other states along the coast. So it's not a California thing, but make no mistake, when I ask our constituents here, and my district is a purple district, you've got plenty of Republicans that live on the coast as well, and they don't want to see oil rigs off their coast any more than than Democrats do. This is not in any way a partisan issue. When you move to a place like the California coast, the Florida coast, the South Carolina coast, you don't want to see oil drilling. You don't want to foul up the beaches, foul up the oceans. And we have unfortunately, some very bad history in California with offshore drilling and some major environmental problems that have resulted. So we're going to continue to do everything we can to fight offshore drilling in California. And I know that Secretary Bernhardt in the last administration would have loved nothing more than to drill everywhere they possibly could, in general, to undermine our ability to protect our federal lands, to line the pockets of just a handful of fossil fuel industry players. It sure is nice not to have fossil fuel lobbyists in charge anymore.
Amen.
Okay. So let's end this on a high note and tell us, Congressman, what inspires you? You're clearly motivated by conserving our environment. What's the thing that you love to do that inspires you to go out there and do this hard work in Washington?
Well, if you come to my office in Washington, I have artwork from my kids, and they're 8 and 6. They're getting too old. When they did the artwork that's in my office, they were 6 and 4. And my son, he made a beautiful piece of art that just says "Save the Earth," and it's a drawing of the globe. For me, that's what it's all about. What kind of planet will he grow up in? What kind of planet will his kids grow up in? And same with my daughter. What kind of planet are they going to experience? Are they going to have air that's so polluted that they can't breathe? Or are they going to be able to enjoy the beautiful beaches, beautiful oceans the way I have growing up here? Are they going to be able to have a sustainable source of food and sustainable modes of transit? I think about them. I think about future generations. And I know from all of the scientific evidence that if we fail to take actions, we're not going to be able to reverse course for a whole lot longer. And so we have to take the actions now to prevent the worst outcomes from occurring. And the good news, again, is that when I speak to my Republican friends and colleagues in economic terms, just bottom line economics of the trillions of dollars it will cost if we do nothing, most of them understand. They don't always agree with everything. I don't expect them to. I don't expect any of our constituents to agree with everything that we say, but I do expect at least to be able to have that dialogue. And so far, so good in our district. We've been able to have a very productive dialogue. And when I bring matters of climate and energy up, people listen, but we have a lot of work to do.
That's great and so well put. Thank you so much, Congressman, for joining us today and for giving us a little bit of insight about what's happening on Capitol Hill. We're excited to see it all play out in this coming year.
Thank you. Happy to do it, and would love to join you again sometime.
Absolutely. We'd love that.
We'll have you back. Thanks so much, Congressman.